In last week's episode, we talked about the relationship between sleep and the global digital economy. Let's see what you had to say. Okay, so first things first, lots of people writing comments saying that they are watching Idea Channel videos instead of sleeping. Guys, don't worry about it. The videos are gonna be there in the morning when you wake up. You just gotta get some sleep. It's very important. I'm worried about you. You gotta take care of yourself. It's very important to me that you're leading as healthy a lifestyle as you possibly can. Don't make these kind of sacrifices on my behalf. I appreciate it, but it's unnecessary. Relatedly, there were some people who were concerned for my well-being, and I very much appreciate that. I will say, I slept in the night before we pulled the all-nighter, and after getting rid of all of the gear that we needed to shoot the episode, I went and slept for quite a while. So I did not end up having to pull an all-nighter and then go directly to work the next day. I am in a very advantageous position, which is that, I just managed to shift my workday to a different part of the day. But thank you for your concern. Very soon after the episode was shot, got well rested. I know, does that ruin some of the magic? It's okay. I'm this behind the scenes, BTS content here in the comment response video. And speaking of content, there were some people who were upset that in the episode I did not call out the word content. If you listen really, really closely in the score, there's a high note that plays when I say the word content. That's a very subtle nod to the fact that I'm saying content, but just to sort of provide fulfillment. Yar, content. There, we did it. Aleko Giatrakis writes a really interesting comment connecting the prevalence of sleeplessness to the rise of the creative economies or the laptop economy. Sort of talking about how people who are knowledge workers or creative workers might be expected to put in longer hours simply because of the nature of their work. That, it is possible to see how there's a widespread understanding that if you're doing physical labor, you're gonna get tired. It's important for you to get sleep so that, in doing that physical labor, you're not endangering yourself. But the creative economy and knowledge workers, it's a much different story. And that, it's like, oh, you just have to think, like just work more and more. All you have to do is write. It's much easier to do. I think that, yeah, like this is both an unfair position to have and one that, I can see why it might exist. Caitlin Bumbleoff also wrote sort of something in a similar vein that was like, there are professions where sleep is seen as sort of a luxury, and this reminded me of I think it was a New York Times piece that I'll find and I'll put a link to in the doobly-doo about how sleep is like a luxury item at this point. That if you are able to brag about how much sleep you're getting, it's like saying, you have a Louis Vuitton bag or something, which also not cool, but also, yeah, makes the bad kind of sense. Toby Fox talks about how people who are working in creative fields, they mention illustrators, painters, and draftsmen. There's a sort of amount of time that it takes to get into the rhythm of doing the kind of work that you do, and that the amount of time that takes sort of makes it necessary that one works through the night, that it's hard to get into this rhythm during the day. And we actually used to talk about this a lot when I was making theater and making performance when I first moved to New York and started working in the arts. And the thing I heard it referred to a couple times was compiling, that it's like, during the day, you have to load all of these things into your brain. You have to load all of these experiences and thoughts, and like that takes a certain amount of time. And then you have to compile them. You have to spend time just stewing on them, I guess, working through the details so that you can actually sit down and start getting to work. And I think, there's a certain amount of truth in this, but there's also a certain amount of truth in this idea that like, sometimes you just gotta get to work. And I think as I've grown older, I have started realizing the utility in waking up early to do this kind of work as opposed to staying up late. And I wonder if that's just being an old fool now, being an old cranky guy, or if there's actually something neurological that happens. Jes May mentions a really huge and I think damaging part of the 24/7 economy as it relates to shift workers that we didn't really have time to get into, which is the clopin. So that if you work at like a fast food chain or at a retail establishment, like I used to have to do them at Blockbuster back in the day, when you have to close the shop, do all of the paperwork that's involved with closing for the day, and then open the shop, do all the paperwork that's involved in opening for the day. You have such a small amount of time between when you are finally able to leave and when you are required to arrive that getting a good night's sleep, especially if you count the amount of time it takes to sort of wind down, is nearly impossible. And I would say that, yeah, this is a particularly pernicious assault on sleep for shift workers. So much so that actually recently, and it might have passed, I'll have to check in on this, I'm not sure, they were trying to make them illegal in New York City, that someone who is closing is not legally required to then open the next day. Or if they are, there has to be a minimum amount of time between when they leave and when they show up. Otherwise, you're breaking labor laws, which I think is how it should be. A bunch of people in the comments mentioned polyphasic sleep schedules, which is where you do something like sleep for 30 minutes every 4 hours. So instead of getting one giant chunk of sleep every day, you spread that sleep out over the course of, multiple hours. And it seems like Dale Galiniak was the one who maybe had the most success. Most people who I saw write comments were like, I tried it and I couldn't do it. It's way too difficult. And Dale seems to hit on the thing that I had trouble with when I was sleeping this way, but I wasn't sleeping this way like because I wanted to try polyphasic sleep. It was just sort of circumstance, life, work, whatever, ended up sleeping in small chunks for an extended period of time. Is that, man, the world just gets really confusing. That like things that require intense mental activity just become really difficult in a way that's very hard to put your finger on. But I'm curious whether or not there's anybody who's tried this and not managed to just get like really confused and kind of just brain dead, because I can't imagine doing it. I just can't imagine it working out. Neala Ernswa writes a really interesting comment about sleep schedule as it relates to being an Amazon employee, and I just wanted to point this out because it's super interesting and worth reading. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Links to this one and all the others in the doobly-doo. Jens Fogh wonders whether or not the implementation of automation would bring split sleep back, this practice of going to bed, waking up a little bit, and going back to bed. And if I understand your question correctly, Jens, what you're asking is if like automation in industrialized situations, industrialized economies, would then free people up to return to a more natural sleep cycle because they no longer have to stay awake manning the machinery, so to speak. And I mean, I don't know. I'm not really sure. It seems controversial to say that the split sleep thing is natural, that it's not sort of like cultural or learned in a way. And there are all of these studies that, sort of have conflicting reports about whether currently existing civilizations or societies without technology sleep more or less than we do, sleep in greater segments than we do. Lots of people argue about this stuff. What I will say is this. I think there's one view of automation that says it's gonna be great for people's sleep because with all of the robots taking care of all of the jobs, people are free to do other work that doesn't need to happen 24/7. And so we will return to a sort of more normal 9 to 5 sleep schedule or normal 9 to 5 work schedule. And then, 8 to 10 hour sleeping all the time. Great. Back to how it used to be. I think a counter argument to that is if automation takes jobs away from laborers who need to make money, to support their families, to live in the world, then there's a chance that they will actually end up sleeping even less because they have to find even more jobs. They have to find additional work so that they can make up the money that they have now lost to a robot. And we sort of talked about this a little bit in the Q&A. One of the things that I really wanted to talk about on Idea Channel, but we just never got around to, is whether or not before the rise of automation, we need to make sure there is put in place a universal basic income. And I think this is a very related thing. Srpad makes a really interesting connection between the human need for sleep and the concept of ownership, that you could maybe argue that the idea of needing to have something that is one's own comes from needing to have a shelter that they could reasonably restrict other people from entering while they are at their most vulnerable, meaning while they are sleeping. I have never seen this argument before, and I find it very interesting. Srpad, is this some of your original thought? I would find your ideas intriguing, and I wish to subscribe to your newsletter, is what I'm trying to say. Where many of us might think of not having to sleep as something of a superpower, Satan 1016 goes the other direction and says that life would actually probably just be terrible, since there would be no biological excuse to stop sitting at the computer, party all night, to stop obsessing over something that's causing a bad mood, no breaks in your experience, no way to just turn off, that you would actually maybe have to choose to do those things instead of, in some sense, being forced to do them if your circadian rhythm operates the way that it is expected to. And I think, for all of the positive things I can think about when considering what life would be like if I didn't ever have to sleep, I don't think any of them are so great that I would risk the very likely situation where I do something very stupid or very unhealthy because, I didn't have to go to bed. It's a good point.